Hello friends, welcome back to my channel, the Kromakan Psychia's talk on foreign affairs. Once again, we're going to discuss a very crucial issue, that is why the US support Israel. Today the war has crossed, 19 days. Every single moment we are watching and witnessing horror and tragedy. But world's oldest democracy and the most liberal democratic country in the world, America, is standing behind Israel in every moment. Why this is happening and what is the origin of this? Let's have a look at this. Now, it seems, and it has been recorded historically, the US support for Israel is a very old game, right? It's a decades old game. The US support for Israel is unequivocal. It has been consistent since the creation of the Jewish state on May 14, 1948. Washington is sticking to its long established script that provides all the grounds for standing for Israel. From the day one of the current attack of the Hamas over Israel, President Joe Biden is repeatedly echoing the line in public that Israel has a legitimate right to defend itself. This unquestionable support for Israel began with former President Harry Truman, who became the first world leader to recognize the state of Israel. His decision was driven by two main considerations then. First, being a personal one, that is, his former business partner Edward Jacobson actually made all the foundational work to make the way for recognizing the Jewish state by the UN in 1948. The second being a strategic perspective, as Washington wanted to have a trusted ally in West Asia to spread its influence and to gradually counter the growing might of the USSR, America's Cold War arch rival. Especially, the US was using all its military, economic, and diplomatic maneuvers to have a major influence over the Suez Canal, the gateway to control strategic waterways and massive oil reserves in West Asian countries. Now, the support continues since then. In the last more than 5 decades, America's unequivocal support to Israel grew with its decisive victory over major Arab nations like Syria, Jordan, Egypt, etc. in 1967 and in 1973 wars. After the war in 1973, Israel and Egypt signed a peace deal that cemented its relations in 1979. This has literally changed the equation in favor of Israel in the US Congress. It must be noted that Israel is the largest recipient of US aid after the Second World War. During the reign of President Barack Obama, the US government signed an agreement with Israel to send $38 billion military aid over a period of 10 years, including Iron Dome missile systems to the Zionist nation. Besides these tilts towards Israel, another powerful politically sensitive organization called American Israel Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC, wields major influence over both the political parties and their top leaders in the US. But all is not well in the US. That means there has been a growing opposition to Israel in the US. But all is not well for Israel in the US in a sense. For long, the progressive Democrats in the US has been opposing the Jewish treatment of the Palestinians. Back in July this year, the House of Representatives overwhelmingly passed a resolution that pledged full support for the state of Israel. And this resolution clearly condemned anti Semitism and declared that the country is neither racist nor an apartheid nation. It must be noted here that this all happened just before the President of Israel was about to address a joint session of the Congress. The historic resolution once again raised an implicit rebuke to the progressive Democrats who were criticizing Israel for its decade-long policies against Palestine. On record, Pramila Jayapal, the Democrat from Washington and the head of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, called Israel a racist state, but later she taken back her comments. She also clarified that she is not contesting the very idea of Israel, but only its policies of the present government. The irony is that despite her frontal attack on Israel government and opposition to its policies, most of the Democrats supported the resolution tabled by the grand old party, GOP, that is the Republican Party. However, the US Congress is divided over Israel even today. And on the event of the current dastardly attack unleashed by the Hamas over the Israeli state, the tensions between the moderate and progressive Democrats sharply divided on the Israel's treatment of the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip and in the occupied West Bank region. The most powerful Republicans and almost all the ordinary ones are fully standing for solidarity with Israel at this hour of crisis. Also, pro Israeli moderates led by Biden is coming up with strong resolutions and acts to support Israel by saying that the ghastly attack by the Hamas is absolutely unprovoked. That's a fact. President Biden is trying to use this chaos as a re-election strategy for next year's election campaign so as to impress on both the hardliners and many of the Americans who are completely in favor of crushing the Hamas and its dastardly acts over innocent civilians in Israel. But even the leaders of the left-wing American Jewish group called If Not Now echoed their concern for the Palestinian cause. They said the strangling siege on Gaza is a provocation. Blood is on the hands of the Israeli government, the US government, which funds and excuses their recklessness, and every international leader who continues to turn a blind eye to the decades of Palestinian oppression, endangering both Palestinians and Israelis. This is seriously noted. The liberal group called the J Street called for preventing further conflagration and suffering for Israelis and Palestinians. This is how the anti-Israel feeling or a pro-Palestinian feeling is gradually building up in the US. Now, what the experts say. Some experts argue that the benefits of the US support for Israel no longer outweigh costs. It has been a huge burden on the American exchequer. Once the relationship between the US and Israel was justified both on moral and strategic grounds, and the Jewish state readily offered an opportunity to America to influence the West Asian region after the Second World War. Indeed, the establishment of Israel, which projected as a befitting response to widespread anti-Semitism in the West, particularly referring to the Holocaust under the tutelage of Adolf Hitler during the peak of the Second World War. But at the same time, majority in the West, led by the US, simply ignored the reality that the Arabs who had lived in Palestine for centuries had finally lost their indigenous land. What has been failed to project by Washington is Israel's military prowess and advantage from all fronts over Palestine and its people. It was a war between David and Goliath, you can say. And the top of that, Israel is fully backed by the military machine of the US, the world's most powerful nation. So, one can easily imagine what will be the fate of the fighting Palestinians and the Hamas fighters. Now, plan behind the delayed ground raid. From the day one of the Hamas attack over South Israel, we have been listening from Israel government that very soon there will be a ground raid over Gaza Strip. But it had just started today. Why this delay? We need to dig up the background. For the first time, a US president visited Israel during the war. This is very significant. Not only Joe Biden, but also his Secretary of State and Defense, Antony Blinken, and Lloyd Austin landed up in Israel between October 11 and 13, when the hostilities were at its peak. Once they set the stage, President Biden came to Tel Aviv to meet Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to demonstrate total solidarity with Israel. Interestingly, after Biden's visit on October 18, Israel was ready to allow humanitarian aid coming to the Gaza Strip. It is also learned that Israel has started a limited land raid only after 19 days of the crisis. It is to prevent loss of lives of civilians and to negotiate the hostages taken by the Hamas. It is also believed that the unknown Gaza metros that crisscrosses the Gaza Strip over hundreds of kilometers houses the Hamas command centers, and they can inflict upon Israeli defense forces anytime they want. So, considering all these facts, the ground raid was delayed. Now, friends, what Israel exactly wants? The saddest part of the current quagmire is that innocent civilians are punished in the name of fighting the Hamas militants. When the Israeli Defense Forces, that is IDF, ordered more than a million people to evacuate from North Gaza to shift to South Gaza, all international humanitarian agencies warned of dire consequences. Especially, the International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC, immediately raised an alarm of a humanitarian tragedy if a million people have to vacate their homes within 24 hours as the deadline set by Israel. The intention was to launch ground offensive against the Hamas and to rescue more than 200 hostages it is taken from Israel on the day of the attack, that is Shabbat, the holy day of rest and recuperation for the Jews. But then Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority, clearly said the civilians should not vacate North Gaza. The reason behind is that this will offer another opportunity to the Zionist state to recapture more Palestinian territories to push forward its ulterior motives. And for Palestinians, it could be the second Nakba or catastrophe or cataclysm, as many of their older generation already experienced the first Nakba in 1948 during the creation of the Israeli state. The Nakba refers to displacement of thousands of Palestinians from their original homes to make way for the Jewish state. While ordering to evacuate, the Israeli state has stopped all the basic facilities like water, food, electricity, health, etc. to the Gaza enclave. The intention is to pressurize the Hamas to release all the hostages safely. And then the Israeli state wants to, complete their mission, that is to, eliminate the Hamas as far as possible. But the tragedy continues. When a tragic hospital blast that took more than 500 lives of civilians, and as the daily death count is on, how the US and the West are remaining mute spectator to this horror. True, the Hamas had taken the lives of more than 1,300 innocent lives on October 7, while the Jews were celebrating their festival. It is just unpardonable. It's a criminal act on the part of the Hamas, for which it had planned for months to break one of the world's most sophisticated security and intelligence systems. Today, as per the records published in the UN website, the number of people killed in Gaza has exceeded 7,000, as reported by the de facto authorities there. Now, the humanitarians are repeatedly calling for ceasefire and more aid convoys. Meanwhile, the Director General of the World Health Organization, WHO, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, issued a new appeal for sustained safe passage for medical essentials and fuels to keep health facilities open. Sadly, women and children made up of more than 62% of the fatalities, while more than 15,000 people have been injured so far since October 7. Now, the big question looms large over the international community is the war justified? Now, the pertinent question here is that, is it justified for the US, the world's oldest democracy and leader of the global liberal order, to continue sending arms, ammunitions, man and material to bolster the Israeli Defense Forces to pound more and lethal attacks on the Gaza Strip? Are its civilians responsible for what the Hamas did in South Israel? After long and sustained appeals from the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres and other human rights and humanitarian aid agencies, why the Biden administration is either failed or purposefully escalating another war in West Asia. It's not all justified on the part of the US to back Israel at this hour with its superior military equipment, as it could exacerbate the war in already chaotic West Asia. Nowhere the civilians of Gaza and the West Bank are responsible for ghastly act of the Hamas, and the current torture on them is absolutely uncalled for. Despite appeals from the UN and other international bodies, the US is spearheading the acts of aggression and providing all that the Israel state needs to win over the Hamas is nothing but its decade-long agenda to stand behind the Jewish state. It does not vary whoever comes to Washington to rule, whether it is Biden or Barack Obama or Donald Trump. Finally, Israel wins its favor from its big brother in the US. So, the violence and long discrimination against the Palestinian people goes on. What we can do at this moment? It can be an appeal in the name of humanity only. The Israel-Hamas war since October 7 is a grim reminder to the international community that violence only breeds more violence. It's time to halt war in favor of peace. We all need to bear in mind that this planet demands peace simply to serve the uncared for and the most vulnerable people all around us. Maybe the Palestinian people will not be able to reclaim their homeland, but they all have the fundamental right to have peace and claim over whatever territories they have as of today. It's clear that a two-state solution may take longer than ever before, looking at the current hostilities in place. Also, we all need to accept the fact that the way Hamas has displayed its might and brutality over innocent Israeli civilians will certainly not pave the way for an independent Palestine sooner or later. Now, the need of the hour is to stop the war and make way for negotiation and dialogue. Civilian casualties must be stopped, and humanitarian aid should not be stopped both by Israel and Hamas. So friends, it's a very critical hour for international community. We all need to pray and try to prevent such acts of inhumanity. This is at any cost cannot be justified by anyone on this planet. Violence in any form should be condemned. So friends, I'll be bringing you much more on these kind of topics in my next videos. Keep watching my videos. My kind request to you is that keep sharing, subscribing and liking my videos. Also, while looking at this video, you also subscribe, like and share my other two channels, Dr. Makhan Saikia's talk on national affairs and political science by Dr. Makhan. Thank you for all your support. Bye bye.